Although the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as we currently know it truly began with the establishment of the Israeli state in 1948, the root cause goes back to the question, who does the land belong to? Is Israel a legitimate country with a valid claim to its territory and a right to exist? To answer this, we must look at the entire historic context by first going to the Middle Bronze Age, near 2000 BCE. At this time, Palestine was inhabited by the Canaanites. As the Iron Age came around, certain groups among the Canaanites developed a separate culture and religion based around the god Yahweh, and these were the Israelites. According to the Hebrew Bible, they established a large, united kingdom of Israel, which later split into the Kingdom of Israel and the Kingdom of Judah. While the historicity of a united Israel is a matter of debate, modern scholars agree that the kingdoms of Israel and Judah did rise to power somewhere in the period of 900 to 850 BCE. Following this, the region fell to the control of successive invading empires. First the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, and then the Achaemenid Persians. Then came Alexander and his successors, then the Romans, followed by the Byzantines. After the emergence of Islam in 610 CE, Palestine was conquered by the Rashidun Caliphate, which was succeeded by the Umayyad Caliphate, the Abbasid Caliphate, and the Fatimid Caliphate. The First Crusade established the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which was taken over by the Ayyubid Sultanate and then the Mamluk Sultanate. The Ottoman Turks took over in 1516, and for the next 400 years, Palestine was a part of the Ottoman Empire. By the mid-19th century, Jews were a minority in Palestine, making up only 5 to 7% of the population, while 80% or more of the population were Muslims. In 19th century Europe, rapid economic and social changes were taking place. Modern national identities had started to form, based around racial, cultural, and linguistic groups. European Jews found themselves the target of xenophobia and anti-Semitism. Persecution and legal repression in the Russian Empire, including large-scale pogroms, led to the emigration of thousands of Eastern European Jews to Ottoman Palestine. In Western Europe, too, anti-Semitic attitudes prevailed, as exemplified by the Dreyfus Affair in France. Jewish political leaders and intellectuals were increasingly convinced of the need for an independent Jewish state in the historical Jewish homeland of Palestine, birthing the Zionist movement. The First Zionist Congress of 1897 declared that the movement aimed to establish a home for the Jewish people in Palestine, secured under public law. From 1900 to 1914, some 35 to 40,000 Jews, mainly from Russia and Poland, immigrated to Ottoman Palestine, creating agricultural settlements, including a town which later developed into Tel Aviv. Further Jewish immigration to Palestine was then halted when the First World War broke out in 1914, where Ottoman Turkey participated on the side of the Central Powers. Large numbers of Russian immigrant Jews were expelled from the area by the Ottomans as they were considered a threat to wartime security. Hoping to gain Jewish support for the Allied war effort, especially from the large and influential Jewish populations of Russia and the USA, in 1917, the British government pledged to help create a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This commitment was known as the Balfour Declaration. This would also enable the British to bring Palestine into their sphere of influence after the war. Following the Ottoman Empire's defeat by the Allied powers, the League of Nations created the Mandate for Palestine in 1923, placing it under British administration. Between 1919 and 1930, almost 120,000 Jewish immigrants arrived in Mandatory Palestine, and by 1935, the Jewish population had grown to some 300,000 people. The influx of large numbers of Jews and a growing Arab nationalist movement in Palestine led to conflict between the two groups. A full-blown Arab revolt took place between 1936 to 1939 in an attempt to secure Palestinian Arab independence, prevent further Jewish immigration, and combat the aims of the Zionist movement. In response, the British government enforced martial law, suppressed the revolt, and issued the White Paper of 1939, which called for the establishment of an independent Palestinian state within 10 years, to be governed together by the Arabs and the Jews. It also limited Jewish immigration to Palestine to only 75,000 people over the next 5 years, with any further immigration requiring consent from the Arabs. The anti-Semitic policies of the German government, followed by the Holocaust, caused a fresh wave of Jewish refugees to try and enter Palestine, both during and after the Second World War. In 1944, a Jewish insurgency began, in opposition to Britain's continued adherence to the policies of the 1939 White Paper. Severely weakened by the war effort, the British were unwilling to deal with the issue of Palestine any longer and referred the matter to the United Nations General Assembly for a solution in May 1947. By this time, the Jewish population of Palestine had grown to almost 1/3 of the total inhabitants. The United Nations Special Committee on Palestine recommended an end to the British Mandate and a partition of the territory into separate, independent Arab and Jewish states. The city of Jerusalem was to be placed under international trusteeship. While the plan was accepted by the Jewish leadership, Palestinian Arab representatives rejected it, on the basis that almost half the territory of the Mandate was awarded to the Jewish state, despite Arabs having a 2/3 majority by population. Nevertheless, the partition plan was passed, with 33 countries voting in favor, 13 voting against, and 10 abstentions. The plan was adopted as UN General Assembly Resolution 181 on 29 November 1947. The partition plan stated that the British Mandate was to end no later than 1 August 1948, with the two new states coming into existence no later than 1 October 1948. Adoption of the UN resolution caused fresh violence to break out between Arabs and Jews in Mandatory Palestine. Isolated incidents of violence quickly turned into terrorism, bomb attacks, riots, and battles in the streets. Paramilitary forces were organized and involved on both sides, with Arab militia besieging the Jewish residents of Jerusalem. Elsewhere, close to 200,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes by Zionist militias. On the 14th of May 1948, the Jewish People's Council declared the establishment of the State of Israel, which was immediately recognized by both the US and the USSR. The last British forces left Palestine on the 15th of May 1948, terminating the British Mandate for Palestine. Faced with an influx of Palestinian refugees and the prospect of Israeli victory in the civil war, the neighboring Arab countries decided to intervene. The armies of Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon invaded Israeli territory. But after a 9-month-long period of fighting, Israel was victorious and signed armistice agreements with the Arab League. As a result of the war, Israel gained control of all the land awarded in the United Nations partition plan and a further 60% of the land demarcated for the Arab state, including West Jerusalem. In total, Israel now held 80% of the land in Palestine, with between 700 to 750,000 Palestinian Arabs permanently displaced and made refugees in neighboring countries, an event known as the Palestinian catastrophe. The Israeli government refused to let these refugees or their modern-day descendants return. Of the remaining Palestinian territory, the West Bank was occupied and then annexed by Transjordan, while the Gaza Strip was occupied by Egypt. Waves of anti-Semitic violence throughout the Muslim world also led to some 250,000 Jews fleeing to Israel from Arab countries. With such a complex history and the disputed territory of Palestine having changed hands so many times, we return to the question, is Israel's claim over its territory legitimate? Critics say that the country was established through uncontrolled immigration under the rule of colonial powers and against the wishes of the majority Arab population. Furthermore, the failed partition plan and the declaration of the Israeli state in 1948 were not accepted by Palestinian Arab representatives or the Arab world at large, and therefore go against the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. Finally, much of the territory claimed by Israel today was taken from the Arabs by force when they fled or were expelled during the Nakba. On the Israeli side of the argument is the claim that the Jews were there first, before being dispossessed by foreign invaders. Religious persecution by the Romans, followed by Islamic conquest of the Levant, reduced the Jews to a minority in their land of origin. The State of Israel can point to the fact that the international community has legitimized its right to exist through the UN Special Committee on Palestine report, which found that the claims to Palestine of the Arabs and the Jews, both possessing validity, are irreconcilable. It is a fact that both of these peoples have their historic roots in Palestine, and the UN General Assembly Resolution 181, which recommended the creation of an independent Jewish state through the partition of Mandatory Palestine. Perhaps more importantly, the creation of the Israeli state in 1948 was immediately recognized by the two superpowers of the time, the US and the USSR. Israel was admitted to the UN soon after, in 1949, and since then it has been recognized by 165 of the 193 UN member states, including many in the Muslim world. In 1993, even the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the internationally recognized representative of the Palestinian people, accepted Israel's right to exist. The fact is that Israelis and Palestinians both have strong historic and moral claims to the area, and many share a common descent from the Canaanites. Both deserve to exist and have their own independent nations. It would be impossible and immoral to remove either of the two groups from the region.